Welcome to Mind and Faith Matters. I'm Dr. Corey Potter, and I'm the host. Lately I've been noticing how often we get pulled into stories without even trying. And so I thought, what about an episode trying to explain the importance of a story? It happens all kinds of ways. We get drawn into a book, a movie, a conversation. Before you know it, you're right in the middle of it. You probably had that moment too. You pick up a book just for a minute, and suddenly you're several chapters in. Or you start a show planning to watch just one episode, and somehow hours later, many episodes in, you're still sitting there. Or someone starts telling you an interesting story that happened to them, and you've completely tuned out everything else, and you've tuned in only on that. I love friends that are great storytellers. There's something about stories that grab us. I've always loved that. In fact, I love reading for that reason. And I love movies for that reason. And honestly, I love when someone tells me a story from their life. I just love when someone shares a story and gives me understanding. You don't plan on getting pulled in to any of these stories. It just happens. And I want to talk about the reason for that. Our brains are built for stories. When a story begins, your mind starts building a scene. It follows the emotions, it watches the movement, and your brain stays curious about what's coming. And your body even gets involved. When a story pulls you in, your brain releases a little dopamine. That's the chemical that helps you stay focused and curious. And when you feel connected to a character, your brain gives you a bit of oxytocin. And that's the same chemical that helps you feel close to people in real life. And when the story gets tense or uncertain, your body wakes up a little bit. Through adrenaline, your heart might beat faster, or you might lean in without even realizing it. That's a signal that your body's paying attention to the story. By the way, I don't like horror movies. I don't like scary movies that much. I'm a wimp when it comes to that stuff. But in other kinds of stories, I see this in my own life all the time, where I'll pick up a book just to see what it's like, and suddenly I'm in it. Recently, that happened with a book called Head Cases by John McMahon. I remember thinking, this is so clever. And before I knew it, I was following every clue and tracking with the characters on how they solved the situation. Have you ever had a book that did that to you? Where you look up and realize you've been pulled in without really noticing. And then there's another book, First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston. That one kept shifting in ways that made me smile. Every time I thought I had it figured out, the story moved again. Have you ever experienced a book like that, where it kept outsmarting you, and somehow that made it even more fun to read? And before I talk about movies, I want to tell you, I used to tell my kids stories at bedtime, and I would try to do that same thing where I just would intrigue them or help them to imagine something in a different way. And I used to love sharing the stories that captured them or captivated them. And they were like, tell me more, tell me more. One of my favorite things. I do that with my grandson as well. And movies do that same thing to me. Big Hero 6 is an animated movie. It's one that I didn't expect would stay with me so long. But the character, that's a robot, a nurse that one of the main characters, his brother, created as a nurse, like a first aid type robot. And Baymax won me over. His gentleness reminded me a little of my dad. And there was something steady and protective about Baymax. And that made the whole story feel warm. And you might have a character like that too. Someone who reminded you of a person that you admire or that you love. And then there's the movie The Patriot. Beyond being a great action movie, I've always liked movies that have family bonds that are strong. And the way the characters care for each other in the movie gives the whole story a sense of depth. Friends can be that way too in movies. You find yourself caring because they care. And maybe you've had a movie like that, where the relationships pull you in more than the action itself. And then there are stories that just flat out make us laugh. Humor has its own way of keeping us present. It can be timing, it can be the surprise, it can even be the way that a character reacts. I think about the movies that I love, like Central Intelligence with The Rock and Kevin Hart, or Get Smart with Steve Carell. They're playful and a little ridiculous, and that's part of what makes them fun. You can relax into the movie. You know they're going to make you enjoy yourself, and the humor keeps you watching because you want to see what happens next. You probably have a movie like that, the one you turn on when you just want something light. Laughter is so good for us too. It lowers our stress, it helps your body relax. And humor can lift your mood. So when a story makes you laugh, your brain is doing some of the same things that it does with any good story. It keeps you present. It's helping you connect. And it's giving you a moment that feels good. I'm going to share a story that I recently talked about with a friend of mine. My lifelong friend reminded me the other day that back when I was in healthcare, I went to the hospital to see a patient. And I went with my technician, Pat. And Pat and I were friends outside of work. He said he was going to use the restroom and I was going to finish up at the nurse's station, writing a note. When I came around the corner from that, I saw the restroom where I thought he was. And I waited, and I waited. And I thought, what is Pat doing? And then I thought, wouldn't it be funny for me to say, hey, I know what you're doing in there. So I went up to the door and I said just that. I waited a minute and someone walked out of a single stall restroom where it wasn't Pat. It was a doctor or an intern or something. And this gentleman looked at me and was like, what in the world is going on with you? After he turned the corner, I laughed and laughed. And that's when Pat came around the corner. And he said, I went into the restroom that's part of the shower room across from the patients. And I said, you're not supposed to be in there. You're supposed to be in here. And we cracked up. And for months, that was the big thing. I know what you're doing in there. And I'm sure that guy went home and told the story in a different way. Like there was some crazy guy in the hospital that probably shouldn't have been outside of the restroom saying things like that. So I love that a story can have different angles as well. And like I said, even a simple funny moment can stay with you for so long. And this isn't new. Think about it. Long before people wrote things down, they shared stories to remember what mattered, or to pass along wisdom, and to stay connected with one another and people that went through a history or went through situations together. They wanted to have that connection. And we still do that. When you tell someone about your day, you typically tell it as a story, not just a bunch of facts or bullet points. And when families share memories, they share them like, do you remember when? And then they share the story. It's also one of the ways that we make sense out of our lives. And because of that, stories tend to stay with us, help us to remember. And you might forget a lot of things, but a story can stick. Like, oh, I know what you're doing in there. It's going to be with me forever. I've noticed this in my own reading too. There are times when I imagine the scene in my head, what it looked like, what the people were feeling, where I might be standing if I were there. And I even do this when I read the Bible. It helps me slow down, really, and pay attention. It makes the story feel real to me and my life, and sometimes it shows me something about myself that I didn't expect. If you've never tried imagining a scene as you read it, it can be a surprisingly helpful way to take it all in. And it doesn't really matter whether a story is truth or fictional. Like, true stories help us feel connected to real people and real experiences, where fictional stories can give us room to imagine and explore, just like the stories I used to tell my kids. Both can spark something in us, both can stay with us, and both can shape us. Stories also give us a safe place to feel things, to try on emotions without anything actually happening to us. It's like your heart gets to practice. And there are moments when a story just doesn't sit well with us either. And that's normal too. It might touch something tender in us that we don't want touched at that time. It might be on a topic that doesn't feel safe or clear or even kind based on our life. Or it may simply not match our taste. We all have a sense of what feels like a good storytelling. And that varies from person to person. And honestly, the stories you avoid can tell you just as much about yourself as the ones that you enjoy. Over time, stories start shaping how you see things. The ones that you return to can influence what you notice in the future, how you interpret situations, maybe in the same way that other characters or people have, and even how you think about your own life. It tends to happen slowly, but it happens. And it's one of the reasons Scripture is written the way it is, if you think about it. The Bible teaches, but it also tells stories. Real people in real situations making real decisions. For example, one of the stories that has always stood out to me is the moment between David and Abigail in 1 Samuel chapter 25. There's movement, there's tension, and there's a moment where wisdom changes everything. When I read it, I can picture it and I can feel it. You might have stories like that when you read them in the Bible. You start to notice patterns, or you remember how someone else responded to help you to think about your responses. You learn something about who God is and how people relate to Him. And eventually, you can start to see yourself in those stories. And that connection matters. When you connect to a story, it reminds you that your life is part of a larger story. Think about it. Your family, your friends, your co-workers are all part of the bigger story that's around you. Even the events in life that happen at the time in history that you're alive really shape us. And when I really think about it, in today's political world, sometimes it's very hard to get to the objective facts of something, because both sides, or many sides, let's just not say two sides in America, but political parties have spin. And now with all the social media and all the stories that get out there, sometimes something isn't exactly what it seems. Either you think something's true that's not, or you think something's not true that actually is. And so this isn't a story about fact checking, and this isn't an episode where I want you to worry about that. I actually would rather that you think about the stories in your life and the things that you encounter that help you understand your world better and give you peace rather than tension. Connection to stories help you to notice the way that you're thinking about stuff and things that stand out to you, the things that you carry with you from a story. Really tell us a lot about ourselves. So it becomes worthwhile to pay attention. And what kind of stories do you go back to over and over? What type of stories hold your attention? And what stays with you after it's over? There are some simple things to notice, but they can tell you a lot. As I say, you can start to see patterns, and you might start to see what draws you in and find out the why. And that awareness can be helpful in navigating your life. So this week, just notice the stories around you. Notice what pulls you in or repels you, in fact. Notice what makes you laugh or think or feel something familiar. Notice what stays with you. You might find that stories, the ones that you enjoy, are telling you something about what matters to you. And that's a good place to begin. And as you pay attention to the stories in your life, you may find that the stories you love are quietly helping you to understand your own. Until next time, I want you to have a great week. Like, follow, subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast. Really helps. And I want to give you a sneak peek. I have an upcoming episode where I continue with a case study of a certain kind of story. True crime. When I ask myself, why do I love stories so much? And what's the big deal about stories for this week? I was also sparked to think about, why do people like true crime? Why is it so popular? And we all have different reasons. But then I thought, as a believer, as a follower of Jesus, is it wrong that I like true crime? And I think I have some answers to that. I'm excited about maybe you thinking about it beforehand, but I'm also excited about that episode that's going to be coming up. So until then, I hope you love the stories that surround you and that you make new ones this week. Take care and God bless.